Hello and welcome to episode 321 of Hot Media with Bob Mann, entitled The First Casualty of War. And as you can see, if you're looking at the YouTube version of this, of course, obviously, our audio listeners do not see Paul Levinson, but there he is on screen. And he is one of our frequent guests, a really good friend of the show. And we have just so much to talk about, Paul, here, talking about war, actual war going on right now, which, I never thought I'd see war in Europe. And after 1962, when I was scared to death at the age of 9, I never thought I'd really think that nuclear war was a possibility. So we've got a lot to dig in for. First of all, this quote, I've heard it attributed to an isolationist senator back in World War One, a guy named Hiram Johnson. I've heard it attributed to the playwright Aeschylus. Where it's being used a lot, but where is it coming from?
Beats me. I don't know any more than you do. Probably some ancient Chinese philosopher, Lao Tse or something.
But
Uh,
but
or
it does say a lot
Mark Twain, maybe. I don't know.
wherever it comes from. I count on you to know everything.
Yeah.
But anyway, so there is, in all true deep seriousness, that truth has become the first casualty of war in Putin's Russia, because while there are Russians who are getting the truth about this unprovoked criminal war against civilians, against a sovereign nation, many Russians are still buying the propaganda that they have, and Putin is looking to crack down on free press. So let's talk a little bit first, and we have many things to talk about, so please hang in there, because of the fact that we will also be talking about protecting yourself in terms of your own cybersecurity and many other things. But let's just talk about Putin's ability to strangle the truth in Russia. What's going on there?
Well, he has a lot of power. It's not complete, it's not absolute, but as most of people who are paying attention have seen, he is now systematically cracking down on all the independent news services and media in Russia because he wants the only sources of information to be those that he, Putin, controls. And just in the last day, he has pushed through the Russian parliament a new law that makes it a pretty serious crime to publish what they call fake news, what we would call the truth. And by the way, if this sounds familiar, it's the same playbook that Donald Trump was using. What you do is you take this notion of fake news, and there really is fake news in the world, but you twist it around and you condemn the truth. You paint the truth as being fake news, and then you do whatever you can to exterminate that truth. So Putin is pretty effective, but his power is not absolute. And let me just say here, if you go back to the late 1980s, when Russia was still part of the Soviet Union. And we can now see this as part of the process that led to the dissolution of the Soviet Union. There was something called samizdat video. Back then there wasn't an internet, but what samizdat video was, it was an underground movement in the Soviet Union to distribute video recordings of the truth, that is, reporting the truth, the news from the West. And as much as the Soviet regime tried to stamp that out, they were unsuccessful. And that in turn goes back to something called the White Rose. And we may have even talked about this before. These were a
We
group,
did.
yeah, of college students and a professor who, during the worst of the Nazi reign, and obviously it's Putin here who is the neo-Nazi, during the worst of that time in the 1940s, these kids managed to put out a gazette. They used a primitive Xeroxing process, and the SS eventually got them, but it took the SS a long time. So, information is a very difficult thing to control. Putin is doing a fairly effective job of it, but I predict that he's going to lose that war very, very easily because there are so many people with so many phones portable iPhones in Russia. He will not be able to stop the flow of truth into and out of his country.
And one of the things that I never thought I'd hear again is the term shortwave radio. It's something that we used for Radio Free Europe. It's a way to send signals across oceans and continents. But because of the internet and because of satellite radio and podcasting and all of these modern technologies, this became, it seemed, obsolete. But now the BBC is reinvigorating, bringing back pretty much after about 15 years its shortwave radio service in a Russian language. Do you think that might have some effect if Russians can have the equipment and listen to these shortwave broadcasts from the UK?
Yes, I think it will have an effect. And there's a very important media principle here. We always pay attention to the newest technologies, but the older technologies very rarely just totally disappear. So someone could put a message in a bottle and throw it into the water, and it could wash up on some Russian shore. And that would be another way of sending out the truth to the Russian people. And it's not as if the old processes were put aside because they didn't work. It's just that we were excited about the advantages of the new processes. So I applaud what the BBC is doing. We have to hurl everything that we have in terms of information about the truth at Russia, because the more people who get that in Russia, the more there's a chance that the Russians themselves will stop this Hitlerian lunatic. And, I really agree with Senator Lindsey Graham here in the United States, the Republican senator from South Carolina. But he just earlier today, or maybe late yesterday, said the best way of taking care of this is someone in Russia needs to take Putin out. It's as simple as that, although it's not a simple process. And, without Putin, I think the whole attack on Ukraine would fold up and pull back. The Russian military certainly is not having a good time of it there. They must be afraid for their very lives.
This is Putin's war. This is one man's obsession with empire, with power, with evil, for lack of a better word. And yes, this is a case where, this is one individual who really is at the root of all of it, but has so much power. And he's been hidden so deeply during COVID. And, he's built a state around him where everyone is so afraid of him. It's not that easy. But, yeah, I don't agree with Lindsey Graham often either, but that sounds like a plan if a plan could be put together. Let's talk a little bit, though, about the bigger consequences. My guest last week was another regular, Dan Casino, who's a political science professor, and he says, here in America, we have only two paradigms that we look to when we get into a war. One is World War II. We should have stopped Hitler. We didn't, and it was almost too late. And then there's Vietnam, where the domino theory said, well, if they take South Vietnam, Hawaii is tomorrow. And that turned out to not be true and cost us the Vietnam War. So there's this back and forth of how far do we go? But this war would have nuclear complications, to put it lightly. And anybody who subscribes to this podcast knows that I am certainly a fan of CNN and MSNBC and not of Fox, but I'm a little bit concerned about what I see as a bit of naivete on the part of some of the hosts on these networks, talking about the fact that we have to do something. I mean, you look at the slaughter of children and innocents and blowing up apartment buildings, and it's more than you can take. But yet, baiting him into a nuclear war could be very, very dangerous. So, give me your take on when people talk on the air about the idea of, well, we've got to do something because as people, we certainly want to, but we're dealing with a madman.
That's a question that has been occupying my brain ever since this whole terrible attack on the Ukraine started. And I've come to realize a couple of things. I am feeling increasingly uncomfortable about the possibility that the United States and NATO will in spite of all the military aid and moral support they're giving Ukraine, will stand by and watch that country annihilated. There's something that's just unacceptable about that to me. And, like you, I'm not a warmonger. I marched against the Vietnam War. I oppose just about every war the U.S. has been in since World War II. And also, like you, I wasn't quite born yet during World War II, but I always said, even during Vietnam, that if this were World War II, I wouldn't have been marching in Washington against that war because Hitler was a genocidal maniac who had to be stopped.
And
So,
we would be next. I mean, that's the thing.
uh,
But nukes throw something else into the mix.
but the problem is, if you look at it and you try to dissect it, yes, Putin has nukes. So, yes, we don't want to do something that Putin will use as a pretext to use his nukes or be genuinely provoked to use his nukes. But you and I were talking before we started recording this, and other people have said this as well. I would by no means bet or be comfortable with the prospect that he won't use the nukes anyway. He's a madman. He's out of control. What will he do if the Ukrainians start uh, doing even better than they're doing, and the Russians become more stalled there?
Or
Furthermore,
he's just furious because of our sanctions. We've
that's
hit him in
right.
the pocketbook, which is great, but it could, in his twisted mind, be justification to launch.
That's right. And look, just last night, as I'm sure most of our listeners and viewers know, the Russians attacked the biggest nuclear power plant in Europe, in Ukraine. There was a fire that was raging there. Ukrainian firefighters, under fire from the Russians who were encircling the plant, were able to put it out. But I've heard estimates from experts that if that fire had destroyed the cooling system that every nuclear power plant has, that would have created a catastrophe 10 times worse than Chernobyl. So if we in any way allow Putin to continue doing this, this is what we're risking. And although I don't like it all, look, you and I both live in the New York area. And just as you were saying, I don't remember being so frightened about a possible nuclear exchange since a few years older than you, was a kid in just a very few years older than you, since I was a kid in 1962. And I never imagined in a million years that I would again, have that feeling. But look, let's face it, if there's a nuclear exchange, the New York area is going to be one of the main targets. So obviously, to say the least, we don't want that to happen. But I would ask any person who's listening, can you stand by and watch Ukraine being annihilated by this monster? And all that I can say is I don't have the power, to do anything. We're just commentators, observers. But my soul won't let me do that. I just can't stand by, you know. And to some extent, it's calling Putin's bluff. But look, Putin and the people around him. If we, for example, put in a no-fly zone over Ukraine, and they launch a nuclear attack on us, that would be the end of Russia. They would be totally, totally destroyed, and I don't want to see that happen either, because there are a lot of good people in Russia. But I think surely that there are at least some sane people around Putin, and they wouldn't let that happen.
Do
So
we do we, Paul, have any sense of unity in this divided United States, or when Trump runs his mouth and just says Putin is so intelligent and our leadership is so dumb, which is a direct quote. I heard the soundbite. Does that in any way undermine our resolve to be doing the right thing? Are people really listening to this man who idolizes Vladimir Putin?
Well, yes, some people are. Fortunately, because we still live in a democracy, these people are not in a majority. Maybe they're 30, 35% of the population, who knows? But these are the people who think Tucker Carlson speaks the truth, who think Trump is some kind of messiah. And, we've talked about that as well. This is a hopeless case. Some of these people will never be convinced. And obviously, this coincides and intersects with, you know, uh, COVID is not such a serious problem. And when you wear a mask, all you're doing is virtue signaling, and the vaccine either does nothing or itself makes you sick. So there's nothing we can do about that. And the attempt to convince these people will not succeed. So we just have to proceed as a democracy. And I think a majority of people in the United States would support our doing a little more than we're now doing to help Ukraine. Also, just this morning, NATO announced that they are not going to support a no fly zone because they don't want to get into a nuclear conflict with Russia. So, but this is something that's changing day by day. And, one of my grave concerns is something horrible will happen, like another Chernobyl created by the Russian attack, and then everybody will look back and say, well, maybe I guess we should have done more to stop the Russians.
Right. You don't want to be Neville Chamberlain, and you don't want to be Lyndon Johnson. It's
Right.
kind of a real, desperate decision. Let's just talk on a very basic level of protecting ourselves, because what is certainly likely is a cyber attack. And I see right over your shoulder there what is that? The Encyclopedia of Computer Science, right there.
Yeah.
So,
Do you know why it's there?
oh, because you want to make sure you're preventing yourself from Russian hacks during the course of the next week.
No. It's
It
there.
holds up the shelf.
That's definitely a good consequence. It's there because it has an article in it written by me.
But there you go.
So there you go. But my name isn't on the cover, so it's still magnanimous that I put it up there. Actually, because I like look at the contrast. On the one end, it's computer science. On the other, you see those two little Thomas Edison cylinders. That's where
Yes.
they used to play music, back in the 1880s and 1890s. So
Well, as a matter of fact, I failed this time to give your complete intro because I wanted to get into it. And Dr. Paul Evanson is professor of communication and media studies at Fordham University in New York City, and certainly knows the history of media. And that's why he is such a great guest and brings us so much perspective. Let's talk about something which is a form of communication. It's not mass media, but protecting ourselves from a cyber attack. Do you have any suggestions of what people might be doing in terms of being smart, double factor authentication? Obviously, a massive hack. You have no idea what to do in that case, but what can we do at least to take some preventive steps?
well, I think you mentioned the single most important and best defense against individuals being hacked, and that's double authentication. And I'm sure, again, most of our listeners and viewers know that. Look, it's a little bit of a nuisance, but when you sign on, it doesn't take that much work to have something sent to your smartphone where you can verify that the person is you, or something sent to your email, and that makes it much, much more difficult, even if you think about it, if a hacker has your password. And here, experts are always saying make your password as complex as possible. That's true. Don't just make your password my passwords, or your birthday, which can easily be discovered. But the truth is, passwords can be sifted out of online situations. It's happened many times, but
Using the
double
same password for two different accounts, they hack the one, they've got the other.
that's right. But that's why double authentication is it's nothing is foolproof. and it's always a cat and mouse game. But if you think about it, it's a pretty effective way of doing it. Somebody who has my password, okay, good for you. You don't have my smartphone in your hand. There's no way you can verify that sign on.
Let's just mention one thing that seems kind of hopeful. We have a Radio Free Europe style shortwave radio coming back. But actually, we were going to talk about TikTok, which seems kind of petty at this point. New Jersey, Connecticut, other states, not only in this area, but elsewhere in the country, looking into TikTok and a possible negative influence on the youth. But actually, you're telling me that TikTok has been successful in countering some of Putin's propaganda, and there are others who are trying to hack Russia.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, TikTok has really been heroic. And I've seen several reports about this. What they've done is obviously a lot of kids in the Ukraine, pretty much everywhere in the world, have smartphones, and TikTok is their favorite online app. I mean, forget about Meta, forget about Twitter, forget about Instagram. I mean, if you're 12, 13, 14 years old, it's TikTok. It's all TikTok. And it's extremely easy to take a quick video of something that's happening, put it up there on TikTok, and then the algorithms send it out to anyone who's expressed an interest in it. So these kids in the Ukraine have been doing a very, very important service both to their country and to the world by getting these videos out there. Of course, the Russian information specialists are not stupid. So they're doing their bit with disinformation, sending out false, deep fake videos, et cetera, et cetera. But you know what? Kids are getting so sophisticated that I saw a survey. They're better than many adults in being able to say, "Oh, come on, that's a deep fake. There's no way that could be real." So someone, and actually more than one person, has said this war is the first TikTok war. There have obviously been wars fought when the internet and social media were around, but TikTok is playing this important role, and that's why, as you know, I will always be a champion of communication, and in this case, social media, and in this case, TikTok. Yes, it can be used to spread disinformation for sure, but on the other hand, it's the best way of getting the message of freedom out there to the world.
We are pretty much out of time right here. I know a podcast can go on forever, but based on our format. But as always, you are such a prolific person. And now that you're back in action, tell us about some of the things you're writing and some of the things you may be doing in terms of music and the many other adventures of Paul Evanson.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that you may recall the last time I was interviewed, I guess about a month ago, I was talking about this new story. It's real life. It's an alternate history about the Beatles, in which they didn't break up and John Lennon wasn't killed, and the tunnels underneath Fordham University play a great role in it. I've gotten such great response. Several people said, "Hey, the story ended, and on one hand, it was a perfect ending. On the other hand, I wanted to read more." So I didn't have to be told that more than once. I'm now in the process of beginning to expand that into a novel. I'm starting to write the second chapter. And I have to say, with all the horror that's going on in the world, it's a real pleasure to be able to escape for a little while into this much nicer realm. I mean, there may be heartbreak in the story, but it's a much nicer realm than what we're seeing and hearing in reality. The other point I would make about my music, and we've talked a lot about Welcome Up, my 2020 album. Well, my 1972 album, Twice Upon a Rhyme, is undergoing a nice rediscovery. In fact, last night on another podcast called Being Frank. They were that podcast was interviewing a Ukrainian journalist, now of course a freedom fighter, and they ended that podcast. They wrote to me and said, "Could you send us a song?" And I gave them an MP3 of my song "Looking for Sunsets in the Early Morning," which I thought was a good song for that, subject, for getting some more peace in the world. And I was very honored and moved by the fact that they put that song at the end of that podcast. So, um, you know, I the problem is always, and I know you understand this. We're professors. We create things, but I think neither of us ever imagined that all of that professional work that we do, that wonderful nurturing work that we do to students, would be smacked in the face by this, horrible event that's going on.
I truly never saw this coming. We've worried about terrorism. We've worried about civil war in our own country, the divisions, civil war still in quotes, thank God. But a return to war in Europe, a return to Russia as an archenemy, a return to being worried about nuclear weapons. That's the amazing thing about the 2020s is that things that you didn't think of 3 weeks ago have come to define your entire life and your entire existence. And that is amazing.
It is amazing, and let's just hope Ukraine gets through this, and we, the world, get through this. And we did win World War II, but
This
it
is true.
took a long time, and a lot of good people were killed.
And at a great, great cost. Yeah. And well, listen, Paul, thank you because one of the things that I like most about having you on the show is that you are equally good as a guest, whether we're talking about fun things, movies, TV, sci-fi, or the very, very serious. And I thank you so much always for being here on Hot Media.
Anytime, Bob.
And that is Dr. Paul Levinson, who is professor of communication and media studies at Fordham University, my alma mater in New York City. And I just want to mention to those of you watching on YouTube or listening on any of the audio platforms, this is still primarily an audio based podcast. Please subscribe. And please also go to my website, which is www.bobmanhotmedia.com. And there you can find out just for the video audience, there it is up there on the screen. You can find out so much about this podcast and also hear our archive shows. Please follow me on Twitter, my handle at BobManMedia. Now, next week, among all the things that I'm dropping and banging around here in the studio, I had the chance to interview someone who is not on our usual bullpen of guests, and this is Professor Mary Beltran from the University of Texas at Austin, who has just published a book called Latino TV, A History. It goes all the way in terms of American television and Latinx images and portrayals from the dawn of television right up until the present day. So we're really looking forward to that. Please join us on a regular basis. And if you do, audio or video, please subscribe. And please join us every week as we talk about the most important, and in this case, truly the most important and most controversial issues in the media right here on Hot Media.